Monzo Business is the proud partner of The Rest is Money. Now, did you know that over 600,000 businesses are already banking with Monzo Business? And mine is one of them. To celebrate us teaming up, we've got a special offer for you. New customers get Monzo Business Pro or Team for free for the first 6 months. Just head to monzo.com/therestismoney to claim it for your business. Now, maybe you run your own company and you're looking for a bank with the solutions to make your financial admin easier, like expense cards that help your team save loads of time as your business grows. Just go to monzo.com/therestismoney to learn more about the special offer and find out which of their plans is right for you. Offer is available to new Monzo Business customers only for either Pro or Team plan. Offer ends on the 31st of July 2025. After the offer period ends, Pro will be £9 a month and Team from £25 a month. Expense cards are only available with Team. Only sole traders or limited company directors in the UK can apply. T's and C's apply.
And welcome to The Rest is Money with me, Robert Peston. Now, annoyingly, Steph's not here, but we've got, I don't know if you're a sort of substitute, because you're never a substitute for anybody, but I'm thrilled that we've got the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, with us today. So much to talk to you about.
It's a pleasure to be here, Robert. Thanks for finally having me on.
And Sadiq, there's a ton of stuff I need to talk to you about, and there are big issues actually around the economy of London and the South East. But I did want to start really with bigger political picture. You are a Labour mayor of London. And I suppose I just wanted to ask you, how different does it feel to be a Labour mayor of London under a Labour government? Because for most of your many years as mayor, you've operated under Tory prime ministers. Does it feel very different?
You know, I've been the mayor since Moses came down with the tablets. It's been that long. But I've had, David Cameron as prime minister, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, and now Keir Starmer. And to give credit to David Cameron, I think he was a prime minister who believed in devolution. He believed in working with the mayor of the capital city. But I only had him for a short period of time because of the referendum, and he decided to quit. It's been tough, frankly speaking. It's been tough getting access to prime ministers and chancellors. Philip Hammond being the exception. He was very good. He got the importance of the capital city. It's been tough getting a fair hearing. It's been tough trying to explain to previous governments that it's not in our national interest to pit London versus the rest of the country. It's been tough to explain to the government if they talk down London, it's less likely a chief executive, a VC, angel investors will want to invest in London. It's been tough to explain to previous governments why infrastructure, housing, transport matters. And so the last, 10 months haven't been, a bed of roses. We've not got everything we've asked for. We still await the CSR announcements next week. But having the ability, Robert, to make the argument is so important. Having the ability to explain to the Prime Minister, to the Chancellor, to the Secretary of State for Transport, to the Prime Minister, why these things matter is important for me and important for London. And we'll wait and see how much fruit we bear when the SR's unveiled next week.
I mean, I suppose a contrast that somebody like me would see is you have, I would argue, looked like a, nothing conventional about you, but a more conventional Labour mayor. Many would argue that this government hasn't been Labour enough and has seemed to define itself by, welfare cuts, abolishing universal entitlements to winter fuel payment, refusing to reinstate access to universal credit for those with more than 2 children. How frustrating has it been to be a Labour mayor with a government that, as I say, many would say are just not doing Labour things?
Well, I was a member of Parliament when Tony Blair was the Prime Minister and Gordon Brown was the Prime Minister. And I feel one of the challenges Keir's had is for those of us who have been campaigning for Labour, for those of us who are Team Labour, it's a bit like waiting for Godot. We project our own expectations, wishes, demands on Keir and his team. And let's be frank, his inheritance is far tougher than Tony and Gordon's in 1997. And they've had to grapple with not just the last 14 years, but with hard Brexit. They've had to grapple with the consequences of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. They've had to grapple with the consequences and the trail of the pandemic. And then you've got on top of that the uncertainty posed by the president of our closest ally, who you go to bed not knowing what you'll wake up to. And so in that context, I think it's been really tough for the Prime Minister and the team. But of course, listen, all of us who worked really hard for, a Labour government would have expected and hoped for instant gratification. We've not had that for obvious reasons because, the money's tight and tough choices have got to be made.
So you think they're the right choices, do you?
Well, we'll have to wait and see if the CSR gives us more scope for the sort of stuff that many of us want the government to do. I'm somebody who believes...
But isn't there a risk already that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has announced, I think it's a £15 billion package of transport investment in the Midlands and North? I mean, the politics of that are pretty transparent, that there was quite a lot of criticism that the government faced when its big infrastructure investments to date rather favoured this part of the country, whether it's, the runways, particularly the runway at Heathrow, or, whether it is the corridor between Oxford and Cambridge, which is not exactly in your patch, but it's definitely in the south. And there was a risk that this government would be seen to be ignoring the North and the Midlands, which is why, they make a big song and dance about these transport investments. But in general, don't you worry that, in a sense, the tremendous advantages that this part of the world has means that you're not going to get what you want?
Well, firstly, I think the government's got it wrong with Runway 3, and the whole Heathrow Runway 3 saga, I think, needs to come to an end in terms of Runway 3. Look, we as a capital city contribute north of £530 billion in terms of economic output. We contribute about a quarter of the GDP of the country. Roughly speaking, 21% of the tax take more than 30% of the country's exports. So we matter as the capital city. What's important, though, is unlike the last 14 years where London's been pitted against the rest of the country, it should be us and the rest of the country. And I fully support, and I was cheering when Rachel and Heidi, the Secretary of State for Transport and the Chancellor, announced this funding for West Midlands, the North, West, Yorkshire, elsewhere, and so forth, because London needs the rest of the country to be also flourishing and thriving, not at the expense of London.
So can I just ask you a question on this? Because this is such an interesting issue. We've had years now of successive governments, and I suppose Boris Johnson was the biggest or original cheerleader for this, so-called levelling up, trying to narrow the wealth and income gaps between the rest of the country and London. That's not happened. The data shows that the gap between London and the rest of the country is pretty much... Sorry?
Parts of London.
Parts of London. I don't want to get back to the inequalities within London. Of course, that's really important. But if you just look at the averages, right, that gap between London and the rest of the country, wealth and income, has not closed.
Well, listen, that's firstly one of the reasons why I support the announcement today when we're having this conversation in relation to additional funding for other parts of the country with transport infrastructure and so forth. But the second part of the answer is this. Look, you can make our country more equal by making London poorer, right? Logically speaking, our country becomes more equal. That is bonkers. What you should be doing is not simply giving a bigger slice of the pie to the parts of the country, but increasing the size of the pie. So London gets investment as well as other parts of the country. I'll give you one example, a tangible example, which shows the difference we can make. So I had the pleasure of being a minister in the last Labour government that introduced a bill in Parliament, the Business Rates Supplement Bill, which required businesses in London to pay a contribution towards what was then called Crossrail. I then became the Crossrails Minister, and I was then fortunate to be the mayor that opened Crossrail, now called the Elizabeth Line. The Elizabeth Line goes from Reading, outside London, the last time I checked, to Shenfield, Essex, outside London. We in London paid 2/3 of this line, the in London, both London taxpayers and London businesses. The government paid for a third, Reading to Paddington, Liverpool Street to Shenfield. But here's the great part of the story. This train line is the most successful train line in the country, but the trains are built, guess where? Derby. The signage built, guess where? Isle of Wight. The infrastructure built, guess where? In parts of Yorkshire. We've not got the expertise to build this line, but other parts of the country has. And so for every £10 we spent on this line, £7 went to other parts of the country. So we, the capital city, benefit by having a fantastic rail line. So does Reading and so does Shenfield. But the rest of the country benefits from the jobs created by this piece of infrastructure. So the impression that's been given wrongly is London's getting all this at the expense of other parts of the country, but they benefit as well. It's not crumbs off the table by any stretch of the imagination. These trains are built in Derby and they're brilliant world-leading trains.
They are, I have to say, as somebody who has sort of immersed himself as I have in, a sort of series of books and sort of films about this kind of stuff. I think when Londoners say, be grateful to us for our success.
That's not what I said. That is not what I said.
Sure that's...
No, what I said was the opposite. What I said was we need the expertise of those that make the lifts in other parts of the country. We need the expertise of those in the Isle of Wight. I'll give you an example, our buses. So we've got the most electric buses than any city in Western Europe. I'm incredibly proud of that. It helps us get to net zero, improves air quality. I've not got the expertise in London to make these buses. I tell you who has: great engineers in Falkirk, great factories in Ballymena, great factories in Yorkshire. And the point is, we rely upon this expertise in other parts of the country, and it's not crumbs off the table. Be grateful to us. It's an example of partnership approach. That's why I'm cheering on the additional investment in other parts of the country, but also saying London also needs investment. You and I both know young people, indeed our children, who will end up with great jobs but can't afford to live in London because of the housing crisis. If the country's going to prosper, flourish and thrive, we need people who are young to be able to stay and live in London to do the jobs that are being created. So it's in the national interest, yes, to build 1.5 million homes over this Parliament, but a significant chunk has to be in London and the South East because a lot of people need that housing.
A related issue in terms of economic development is the growing sort of tech sector that we have here. But it takes me on to a sort of slightly philosophical question, which is how we define our tech sector. Because when I talk to the entrepreneurs in that area and those who back these businesses, they see themselves as part of a European tech sector. They don't narrow it down to London and, Oxford, Cambridge. And they see the competition with Silicon Valley as being actually a sort of combination of London, Paris, Amsterdam, certainly those that are on the high-speed trains. When you think about London's position, we are definitely the strongest of all of these centres, right? We have more of these companies than, Paris and Amsterdam and the rest. But they also have significant players. So how do you see it?
Yeah, so look...
So are we a hub for Europe,
Yeah,
essentially?
Yes and no. So look, I'm both competitive, but also I believe in collaboration. And so let me just give you some numbers to give you a sense of scale when it comes to London and other parts of the globe. Well, firstly, Silicon Valley's been going for decades. Silicon Valley is the startup capital of the world.
Oh yeah, by a huge margin. I mean, we're not disputing that.
Sure.
But we've got to, if we're going to have a prosperous, growing economy, we've got to have more of it.
Let me tell you our USP. So if you look at just AI, one example, we've got more than 1,300 AI companies in London. That's more than the next 3 cities in Europe put together. I'll give you another stat which is just remarkable in terms of my pride in this city. The top 4 cities in Europe when it comes to tech investment: London, Paris, Stockholm, Berlin. If you add up the investment in tech in Stockholm, Paris and Berlin combined, it's the same as London. That gives you an idea of how far ahead we are.
But nonetheless, if you put all of that together, the investment is a fifth of what it is in California.
And that's the point.
So we're all suffering from underinvestment.
Well,
let's be clear.
Yes and no. And so let me tell you the huge advantage we have in terms of London and our friends in Berlin, Stockholm and Paris. If you were in America and you wanted to have access to capital, you'd go to New York. If you wanted access to the creative industries, you'd go to, and culture, you'd go to Los Angeles. If you wanted to speak to the policymakers, you have to go to Washington. The joy of London, we have all of that within a 15-minute tube ride. And that's one of the reasons why people have been attracted to London. The other big advantage we have is the pipeline of talent coming through. More than 50 universities in London, more universities in the top 50 than any city in the world. Our challenge has been filling the gaps in those critical sectors. And that's why it's so exciting, some of the stuff Peter Carl's doing in relation to attracting investment here. I'm really pleased, Robert, during my mayoralty, we managed to persuade Amazon, Apple, Google to expand their presence in London, and at the same time as supporting startup and scale-ups as well. But you're right in your starting point, which is we must work close with Paris, Berlin, and Stockholm.
So just out of interest, so
And we
I'm
are.
sure,
And we are.
I'm sure you've met him. There's a impressive investor, Saul Klein, who's come up with this concept of New Palo Alto, which is basically the European-wide cluster that is challenging California. I personally find it a compelling concept, but it does require us, I think, to balance a bit more collaboration and not just, red in tooth and claw competition.
Oh no,
with other
and
European
you're
cities.
spot on, and it really isn't. Us always been at fisticuffs competing and stuff. So we've got London Tech Week in June taking place in London. At London Tech Week, you'll have French, German, Swedish, and many other European, coders and others represented in London. Our big strength, though, Robert, and we mustn't ever underestimate this, is the joy of agglomeration. We've not just got a great tech sector in London, like Silicon Valley. We've also got financial services, professional services, education, culture. So ed tech, clean tech, legal tech, fintech, and so forth.
Although you have led me on to the other thing where I'm genuinely worried about, if this is true of the whole of Europe, the big difference between us and America, Silicon Valley in particular, is we're still not providing the scale-up finance. This is something I've talked to the Chancellor about repeatedly, but we still don't, if you are a really ambitious, growing tech company in Europe and you want to get to the stage of global domination, almost all of them say it's a no-brainer, we've now got to move to America. And that's a real issue. That's a real problem for us. We've got to persuade these companies, when they've got those global ambitions, to stay here, and we've got to provide them with the cash.
Spot on. And, you just don't need to go to a Nobel Prize winning Brit, who's founded DeepMind and Google to see a real example of this. But you speak to the pipeline and where they're looking at VC investment, where the R&D goes. So the good news is we've been spending a lot of time with fantastic universities in London, Imperial in particular, UCL in particular, King's College. We've set up a tech cluster to work with this talent, Robert, in terms of...
This is early stage. What I'm talking about, when you've got to the stage of having, $25 million of turnover, and you want to get to $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion, too many of these businesses will relocate to America. And we've got to stop that from happening, haven't we?
Yes and no. Yes, we do. Want to keep as much talent as we can. Retaining that talent is very important. We want to recruit that talent here as well. Let's not be scared of pinching some of the talent from America to come here as well with our unique ecosystem. And here's the beautiful thing about never wasting a crisis.
Have you told Yvette Cooper that she's not doing enough to help you on this front? Because that is particularly with Trump, there are loads of Americans who want to leave America at the moment with real talent, and they look at Britain and they think we pulled the drawbridge up. Why,
That's not quite what they think. Let's look at
a lot of them do.
Well, look at the numbers. We have a record number of Americans applying for British citizenship this year alone. Since records began, there's never been more Americans
for obvious
applying
reasons.
I think you're making my point for me, Robert. And here's the joy.
But there are so many more who want to come here. And there's a related point. As you know, pretty much every university in the country is in some state of financial crisis. They're sacking people. They're not hiring people. Why isn't the government helping universities, providing them with funds to get the great brains out of American universities who want to leave Trump's America?
Let me deal with each of your various points, if I may. So firstly, at a time of huge global instability, at a time when there are choppy political waters in America, I think what London provides is that rare thing: a stable, open, diverse environment where innovation can flourish and thrive. And actually, we've got to take advantage of the opportunity provided by what's happening across the globe. And I agree with the premise of your argument, which is we should be, attracting that talent through our universities. Postgrad visas are really important in terms of enticing people here versus Canada, Australia and elsewhere. But also in terms of...
But the Home Office is restricting all this.
Well, yes and no, in terms of they're not restricting all of this. What the Home Office is saying, and by the way, I'm not the Home Secretary, what the Home Office is saying is that there are certain
you can make your representations to her now.
Which is the point of having a Labour government. I can now make these representations to a Labour Home Secretary, where in the past I couldn't, and I've had many Conservative Home Secretaries. And it's a point many of us understand in terms of the London story. The London story is, and you know this from your background, the London story is we've been a place that's attracted talent from across the globe. And it's benefited our city economically, socially, and culturally. And one of the biggest USPs we have as the capital city is are our values. And that's one of the reasons when you're talking about, and we're talking about Americans coming to London and from other parts of the globe, it's because of our values, our openness to different ideas, different ways of working. Our challenge with the tech sector, Robert, has been actually, if you're a great inventor, you've got a great product, you get better rates of VC. The scale of VC is huge, but also your ability to scale up is exponential. What we're going to do is create that same sort of environment in London as well. And I'm really confident we've got that environment. We can do even better.
You didn't really answer my question about whether the government, frankly, is grasping. This is an amazing opportunity for the UK. We suffered in the 1960s and 70s, as you probably know, from this terrible brain drain where so much of our talent went to America. Now, it's quite clear that because there are so many brilliant people in America who hate the Trump presidency, that if we opened our doors in our universities and our businesses, there would be a massive reverse brain drain. And I'm not sure the government is seizing that opportunity.
I think it's really important that we roll out the red carpet for this talent. I think it's really important that London is seen as an attractive place for talent to
But do you think Keir Starmer gets this?
Well, I think it's really important the government understands that there's an opportunity here for our city and our country, and not just tech, by the way.
No, I wasn't restricting
culture,
it. Yeah,
creative
sure.
industries, life sciences. When you look at the London economy, we've got huge vacancies in massive sectors, creative industries, tech, construction, hospitality. Yeah. And I think it's really important to recognise, yes, we're going to train up in record numbers Londoners to have these jobs, but there's still vacancies there. And there's this talent that's desperate to come to London, and we should be attracting and enticing that.
Now, before the election, one of the big things that Keir Starmer repeatedly talked about was the importance of devolving powers from the centre, particularly to metro mayors and mayors like yourself. You obviously do have significant powers, but I don't get a sense, actually, that this devolution programme is being executed with the sort of urgency that one might have expected.
I'm frustrated by the lack of progress when it comes to devolving powers away from Whitehall to city halls across the country, including London.
But this was a commitment they made before the election. Why isn't it happening?
Well, the phrase used by the Prime Minister and others is those with skin in the game are probably best suited to make those decisions, and I agree.
We repeatedly talk on this podcast about how one of the huge priorities must be to improve the skills of our people. And one of the things the government talked about was giving much more control over, essentially skills budgets to people who really know what local people need, people like yourself. And that hasn't happened yet.
Devolving skills budgets to mayors is the single biggest positive game changer this government could make to address some of the challenges around growth.
Happening?
Well, I mean, we're lobbying for that, and it's a question I think is worthy of asking members of.
But you agree that this is really important.
Let me give you a tangible example why it matters.
Yeah.
So, civil servants in Whitehall, love them as we do, I don't think are best suited to decide what the needs of London or Manchester or Liverpool or Bristol or Leeds are. I know my employers. I know what they're crying out for. I know what our colleges can provide. I know what our young people's aspirations are. I think we are better suited to match up the employers, the wealth creators with the education establishments, with the young people. But also, Robert, you and I both know the importance of continuing professional development. Somebody who's in a lower paid job, having the right skills to get a better paid job, even within that company. And that's why we're lobbying the government to devolve these powers to mayors across the country, because we know our economies far better than civil servants in Whitehall. And it's really important for the government to grasp the game-changing power of devolution. And it's a frustration to me that 9 years after me being first elected the mayor, I've not got the powers that I think are worthy of the capital city. But also Andy Burnham, Steve Rotherham, Tracy Brabin, other mayors across the country deserve those powers because they know their communities far better than these civil servants.
But just to be clear, you were trying to excuse Keir Starmer for some of the unpopular welfare reforms that he's pushed through on the basis that there wasn't enough money in the kitty, to use that phrase, left behind by the previous Tory governments. But he's got no excuse for not pursuing this agenda. On this, you've just got to take. I mean, you either do it or you don't. It's not a money issue.
I think there's an entrenched view in Whitehall that we know best. there's a view that you and I both experienced, not just in one government department, but in many government departments where we know best. We're the most centralised democracy in the Western world. I'll give you an example. So in London, as the mayor, I get to spend, roughly speaking, 7% of taxes raised in London. Mayor of New York, 50%. The governor, mayor of Tokyo, 70%. And you can just do similar examples with Manchester, Liverpool, and so forth. When it comes to skills, we're not saying give us a big check. We're saying allow us to decide how this budget is spent. And our returns would be far better than, I think, civil servants.
But again, I come back to, I get that there is a sort of culture within Whitehall that says we know best. But why isn't the Prime Minister challenging this culture?
Well, we, the mayors, are challenging the government to change that culture and that approach. And I think, by the way, when you look at the progress made in Greater Manchester, and I'm one of Andy's biggest fans in this regard. A lot of the investment in Greater Manchester has come because they've had a leader of Manchester making that case when it comes to businesses, right? We've been doing that for 25 years in London. Now, wouldn't it be far more persuasive if people like Andy, Steve in Liverpool, me in London could say to an employer, listen, you come and invest in London and I can guarantee we will invest in your people so they've got the skills for the jobs being created. Or I can say to you, listen, we've got match fit Londoners ready to do these jobs. And that's why the government needs to let go of the reins and devolve these skills budgets to metro mayors across the country, including London.
Well, Steph, I think you're completely right. Steph, if she was here, would be cheering you on as well, because this is one of our great obsessions on this podcast. But let's just go for a quick break. Welcome back to The Rest is Money with me, Robert Peston. I want to go back to something you said earlier, which is that, of course, there are areas of significant deprivation within London. One of the things that is very striking, these things are always slightly crude measures, but as you probably know, on the so-called Gini coefficient, which measures inequality, there is more inequality within London than in any other part of the country. If you look at fast-growing countries like America, terrible inequality, right? London has, all our lives, been the fastest-growing part of the UK. Is there just something about fast-growing areas that mean you're just inevitably going to have this awful kind of inequality?
Well, firstly, London is no longer a fast-growing region. Unfortunately, since 2010, our growth has not been as fast as it should have been.
No, but it's relative to the rest of the country.
Sure. And so the first thing is we've got to persuade the government to invest in London to ensure we get
We'd all
growth
like
back.
the whole of the UK to be growing faster, including London. But it's still, relatively speaking, London has continued to do better than the rest of the country in terms of its economic performance.
Parts of London, yeah. And so the issue about inequality is very important, which is we've got people doing incredibly well in London, but people do incredibly badly in London as well. If you think of a caravan, the distance between the front of the caravan and the back of the caravan is too big.
It's awful.
Which is not typical of many cities across the globe. But in London, it should be a problem for us because we're Londoners and we can't allow that to happen. And that's one of the reasons why...
Well, it's true of San Francisco, for starters, and we've been talking about Silicon Valley.
That's one of the reasons why, from City Hall, we've been doing normal policy to address this issue. So for the first time in the history of our great city, every child that goes to primary school receives a free, nutritious meal. Why is that important? Because that saves that family £500 per child a year, which is one of the causes of poverty for many families. Another thing we're doing is to make sure those who are in minimum wage jobs... By the way, a lot of the poverty in London is in-work poverty. So if you and I were speaking 20, 30 years ago about poverty, it'd be out-of-work poverty. It's now
but this is true of the whole UK, in-work poverty throughout. That's why this whole issue of the two-child limit on universal credit is so important.
That's why the issue of training up people in work who are in minimum wage jobs to have the skills to do better paid jobs is so important. And so we've now got a six-fold increase in employers paying the living wage. The London living wage, really important. We've got a good work standard, making sure people treat their employees well. But the basic reason for the poverty in London is because of the fact that you've got those who are in work not earning enough money. You've got those who, for a variety of reasons, are struggling because they've got children and they're in poverty. But also you've got a situation where housing is so expensive in London as well, which is why I'm lobbying for a massive increase in supply of genuinely affordable homes in London. There is no point, Robert, us creating great jobs in London, us attracting big business to London, if Londoners can't access those well-paid jobs. That's what leads to a perception of unfairness, them and us. And that's why it's incredibly important to have inclusive growth going forward.
I mean, there's a related point, of course, and this I do think is incredibly striking. If you look at, for example, work done by the IFS, it shows that although the wealth disparities between London and the rest of the country remain huge. On average, not everybody, lots of very poor people. When it comes to gross income, obviously the gross incomes of Londoners compared to the rest of the country, again, still a very big gap in London's favour. But housing costs in London are so high that when you net off, for example, rents, for example, actually the living standards of many Londoners are not higher than people in parts of the country we think of as being relatively poor parts of the country. So what on earth can we do about these excessive housing costs?
Well, just before I get to the solutions, let me just give you an example of the consequence of the diagnosis.
Yeah.
You've got young Londoners, couples, both in decent jobs, who want to have a child, who are now leaving London because they can't afford to have a home with the child. You've got Londoners who have got a decent job who can't afford to rent, let alone buy in London. And the basic issue is for decades, supply of genuinely affordable homes hasn't met the demand. And that's a simple reason for this issue. By the way, you mentioned San Francisco. It's an issue facing all great cities across the globe. Why? Because more and more people move into cities. Urbanisation is a phenomenon across the globe. So I speak regularly to mayors across the globe about the solutions we could do to tackle this issue. I'm one of Angela Rayner's biggest cheerleaders when it comes to getting a decent settlement in the SR to be able to build these homes. We'll do a number of things, Robert. Diversify the housing supply. We need market value homes. We need homes that are cross-subsidised, that are social housing. We need homes that are built to rent. We need student accommodation.
Do you believe in rent controls?
I do.
Yeah.
So
we haven't got enough rent controls.
Unequivocal. So let me see why we need rent controls. We've got 2.7 million Londoners living in homes with a private landlord. You know, because you work with them, I'm sure, looking around the studio, Londoners whose rent goes up every year at ridiculous amounts each year. Three big issues facing those renting privately. One is quality of accommodation. Andrew's addressed that. Two is security of tenure. No fault evictions being banned addresses that. But three is the price of accommodation. And I think, look, it's possible to bring in a rent stabilisation system without affecting the supply of new housing. And what I'm lobbying the government for is to give us the powers to do that.
And do you get, again, any sense that you're getting a decent hearing on that? Is it going to happen?
In the short term, I don't think we'll persuade the government by next week. But I think the government needs to recognise that, even with the best will in the world, supply will not beat demand for some time. It takes on average 4 years to build a home from, permission being applied for and the home being built. Now, you think about the shortage, the deficit we have. One of the great things about London, you mentioned the 70s and 80s, unlike then, people want to live here. That's a good thing, not just from across the globe, not just from America, not just from Europe, but from other parts of the country. Growth per se without planning is a problem. Growth with planning is not an issue.
And just on the other side of the sort of spectrum, as it were, of all of this, the last budget completely changed the tax system for those with super wealth, the old non-dom system where you could live here as an immensely wealthy overseas person and only pay tax on, your limited UK earnings. That's changed. That's gone. That's been scrapped. Lots of non-doms. These wealthy people have left London. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for London?
I campaign to be a mayor for all Londoners, and I'm a mayor for all Londoners. And I think it's really important for people to understand, and I say this not in an arrogant or patronising way, but London's got to be a place that's attractive for everyone.
So do you regret the exit of these super wealthy people?
I do regret the exit of anybody leaving London, particularly if they leave in this country. Look, Robert, I'm somebody that is really proud of the unicorns we have in London, these companies that are worth billions. And I'm really proud that we're a city that attracts people who are wealthy. And here's the thing
So just to be clear, has she redesigned this tax system for non-doms, in your view, in a detrimental way?
Well, the question you asked me was, do I regret people leaving? And I do.
Was it a mistake to abolish the non-dom system?
I think it's really important to have a system that doesn't scare people away. I think it's really important to have a system where people pay fair share of taxation. Look, I'm not saying anybody should...
It sounds to me as though you're saying it was a mistake.
Well, listen, I think it's really important nobody evades taxes. It's really important that we have...
But this isn't evasion. This is...
Well, exactly my point. Exactly my point. It's really important everybody pays their fair share, whether you're a bus driver or somebody who's a non-dom. I think it's really important we have fair rules around inheritance tax. But also I think we've all got to recognise that, job, wealth, prosperity isn't created just by people in Whitehall. It's by those in the private sector.
Now, I've got a couple of other areas I want to get through. Sadly, we are running out of time. One is to do with the report that you commissioned from Charlie Faulkner. He recommended decriminalising ownership of small quantities of cannabis, and you accepted that recommendation. You think it's the right thing. Sort of classically with this issue, you're sort of attacked from both sides because the government says, we can't possibly move away from criminalisation, and they've taken what you might call a very small C conservative approach to this. I have to say, when I've talked to particularly young people about this, they say, surely the sensible thing to do is actually to do what other cities around the world has done, not only decriminalise, but actually regulate a supply industry, levy big taxes on that and actually create a homegrown, safe, take it away from the gangsters and actually treat it in the way that alcohol and tobacco are treated, make sure that people are supplied with better quality cannabis and let the state raise duties from that.
I think you've articulated the conundrum, and that's one of the reasons. Look, I had an open mind about this, and I asked, for those who listeners that don't realise this, I asked a new Labour Justice Secretary to do this piece of work, and Charlie had an open mind as well. And what Lord Faulkner did was he got together a number of experts to join his commission from criminal, from health, from other sectors of society. They spoke to more than 200 experts. They looked at what's happening in Canada and Spain and USA, particularly New York and Los Angeles. And their recommendation is, and the report is a really sober report, 42 recommendations. So one of the recommendations is to, decriminalise the possession of small amounts of natural cannabis, which is and the knee-jerk response, for the reasons you've said, from the usual suspects, is this is outrageous and so forth. But here's the issue why it's so important to actually read the report. You and I both you've reported about this in the last few weeks and months. Park for a second our views on this, but the government's having to release people from prison accused of very serious offences because of issues with the prison crisis caused by the last 14 years' worth of policies. At the same time, you and I both seen the Commissioner and others talking about the consequence on policing of some of these decisions made, rightly or wrongly. Well, what Lord Faulkner is saying is you could free up police time, you could avoid young people having criminal convictions, which ruins their lives when it comes to getting a job, by this very simple implementation of recommendation. And for the reasons we both know, there's been opposition from the Home Office and the Shadow Home Secretary. And I think that's not the right response to an evidence-based report from experts feeding in to impartial commissioners.
But on the as I say, the sort of more liberal critique, which is there's an opportunity here to create quite a powerful homegrown industry.
What the report says is really interesting. They say there were short-term benefits of this. They've seen it in other parts of the world. Medium-term, but they weren't sure
of allowing legalising production, essentially
regulation of this market. Yeah. So you avoid the sort of 1930s America where it came to alcohol. You could do quality assurance and so forth. So short-term benefits. They weren't sure about long-term negative consequences, so they said wait and see. And that's why I think incremental.
So you're not ideologically opposed to going further than decriminalising and actually regulating and licensing?
Well, I agree with Lord Faulkner, which is let's wait and see for that. In the meantime, let's do this, which is a smart approach to take, because the advantage of going last, and by the way, we are one of the last countries. The advantage of going last is you can see what's happening elsewhere. You can avoid the elephant traps.
Do you think history is? I mean, even though there's been a knee jerk from the government, we're not going to do this. Do you think history is on your side? Do you think eventually this will happen? Decriminalising.
I think it will happen eventually. It may be too little, too late. But also, I think the reality is, on a number of issues, I think governments move very, very slowly. Whether it's net zero, whether it's air quality, whether it's rent controls, whether it's decriminalising small amounts of natural cannabis.
Now, I want to finish on a sort of slightly more general point. Somebody been at the top of politics for a few years now. We have seen a Prime Minister and a government devoting enormous amounts of effort to trying to keep or get Donald Trump on side on certain issues, like tariffs, for example. Enormous amounts of government resource devoted to negotiating a trade deal with America. It hasn't been implemented, and we've just seen another whacking tariff, which, at least part of it will be paid by UK steelmakers, 25%, a new 25% tariff on UK steel makers. We don't yet know, actually, whether steelmakers will end up with a 50% tariff or not. The uncertainty is crippling that industry. We've got all sorts of uncertainties still in the automotive sector because, as I say, the trade deal hasn't been implemented, and it won't be implemented, we now understand, for weeks. Is the government right to devote so much time and effort to essentially trying to do deals with a man, US president, so capricious, who changes his mind so often? What's your view?
Well, my starting point is, what happens in the USA affects not just London, but affects all of our country. It's just the reality of the relationship we have with the USA. The country.
But shouldn't we be devoting more time to getting closer to places like the European Union?
We've got to do more than one thing at a time. So the number one country with whom we have the most trade is the USA. The number one region are the 27 countries that make up the European Union. To give you an idea of the scale, we do 2.5 times the trade with the EU than with the USA. But the USA is still number one when it comes to countries. We've got to do both.
We have to do both, but you would argue that certainly since Keir Starmer was elected, he's devoted way more personal time to America than he has to Brussels.
Well, to give Keir a fair hearing, and it's very important that we do so, is what Keir Starmer has said very soon after he became elected Prime Minister is, and I quote, "We must reset relations with the EU." And actually, Keir Starmer is regularly meeting President Macron, the President of the EU Commission, indeed Prime Minister Meloni of Italy, and so forth and so forth. And you'll see the fruits of that with Ukraine, but also the recent deal with the European Union. So, to answer your question,
pretty limited. I mean, that deal with that deal with the EU did. I would argue almost nothing for London.
It's a starting point, and a lot of this, as you know, is body language. So yes, we've got to do a decent deal with the European Union.
And and presumably you think this particular set of arrangements on food and fishing should be the start of something, not the end.
So look, the deal with the USA, the deal with the European Union, the deal with India, and the deal that's currently being negotiated with countries in the Middle East are starting points. They're the floor, not the ceiling. I'm somebody who's trying to lobby the government to have a youth mobility scheme when it comes to the European Union. I want Erasmus Plus when it comes to the European Union. I think closer alignment must mean convergence. And it's really important that we work closely with the European Union to do that. This is a market on our doorstep of 600 million people. All successful countries do the most trade with their nearest neighbours. At the same time, the USA does matter, not just in terms of security and NATO, but in terms of businesses in London. This month in June, we've got South by Southwest that's come from Austin to the Europe for the first time in London. We've got the Concordia Summit that's left New York for the first time is coming to London. We've got London Tech Week. We've got London Climate Action Week. Many Americans, many Europeans, many Indians will be coming here for that. But it's really important that that the Prime Minister realises, and he does, this isn't the end of discussions with the US. It's got to be the start, and particularly we've got a president who is a nativist, a protectionist, and a unilateralist. Even more important that the Prime Minister is wily and savvy when it comes to dealing with him.
And open to the rest of the world and doing deals with the rest of the world, obviously. So this is the final question, all right? And this is sort of a question that I'm asking because so many people put it to me, and they say the problem with this government, Keir Starmer's government, is they don't know what it stands for. They've seen a whole bunch of stuff that it's done, like sort of, cutting entitlement to winter fuel payment for all pensioners and a variety of other things that they don't associate with a Labour government. And they hear words like, we believe in growth, but they don't see something that looks like a coherent, defining project. So tell me, if you were trying to sell this government to the people who say they don't know what it is, what would you say?
Well, I think what's really important is we try and improve the quality of life of everyone in this country.
That's quite nebulous.
Well, we're going to explain how we do that. How we do that is making sure that Putin can't go further than where he's currently gone. We push back Putin. Security is really, really important. Security domestically is really important as well. We've got to invest in public services when it comes to policing as well. We've got to be building the homes that people need across the country, really important. We've got to make sure our economy flourishes and thrives, because that brings in the tax receipts that pays for public services. I think one of the joys about Keir, is you can't...
joys about Keir, that's not a phrase you hear that often.
You can't pigeonhole him when it comes to, is he this part of the Labour family, that part of the Labour family. That pragmatism is really important. When I used to brief Keir, 20, 30 years ago, when he was a barrister and I was a solicitor, you'd use him for different cases, because you would know he would look at the brief and understand what argument to make in terms of winning the case for our respective client. He's the Prime Minister in choppy waters because of his inheritance, and he's having to navigate that. What you don't want is an ideologue, somebody who's dogmatic when it comes to navigating us through these choppy waters, but somebody who's going to be pragmatic and dexterous and nimble.
But he's still got to be able to tell a story that resonates with people. And what people say to me is, they don't know what that story is.
Well, that's one of the challenges of being the leader of a country during these difficult times. And I'm confident that over the course of the next few weeks and months, you'll be hearing more and more when it comes to storytelling, which is a really important part of politics. You and I both know it's not just the brain, it's the heart as well. And hearts and minds are incredibly important. And I know that the Prime Minister and his team understand the importance of that storytelling. And I'm positive you'll be hearing more of that over the next few weeks.
Well, let's wait and see. And we'll have you back in a few weeks, or whenever you can spare the time, to assess whether your forecast has come true. But Sadiq, as always, it's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
And don't leave it so long to have me back on.
No, we won't. I've just said you're invited back on in a few weeks. I'm going to hold you to it. So that's it for this edition of The Rest is Money. It's goodbye from... You're going to say goodbye?
Can I say goodbye from me? I'm not Steph. I'm Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London.
And goodbye from me, Robert Beston. All the best.